Hey Moon Jade family. Thank you so much for your love and support. Please like, subscribe, and share. It's a simple way to keep our stories coming. I couldn't do this without you. Thank you for being here. Now, grab a seat and let's continue the story. The rain drummed against the hospital windows, a steady rhythm that matched the nervous flutter in her chest. Dr. Morwen Kai's voice echoed down the hall as he led the group of medical students on their first day of psychiatric rotations. Observe carefully. Learn. But remember, this is not just medicine. These are lives that teeter between reality and shadow. Nalaya Brooks adjusted her white coat, its sleeves still stiff from the laundress's starch, and tried to focus on his words. This was supposed to be her moment, the start of the rotation that would determine her final thesis, her future. Yet already she felt the eyes on her, curious, dismissive, some openly hostile. She was used to it. The only black woman in the entire program, Nalaya had endured whispers, laughter, and the sting of words tossed too casually in classrooms. But here, in the hushed corridors of the psychiatric clinic, the whispers seemed different. They grew louder as the students neared a locked door at the far end of the hall, its frame guarded by two nurses who shifted uneasily in their shoes. "That's the VVIP section," one student murmured. "The crazy tycoon," another added. "They say the gods punished him. Too many sins." No, it was the stress. The empire he built crushed his own mind. Nalaya frowned, listening. She had heard rumors during lectures, but now the weight of them pressed heavily against the sterile air. The man they spoke of was Caleth, a former titan of industry, a name once carved into skyscrapers, whispered in boardrooms. His fall from brilliance into madness was a story the tabloids gorged on, but here, in this ward, it had the taste of myth. Dr. Kai's tone was firm. "No one goes in without clearance. He is volatile. Dangerous." That was when Sarika Hans stepped forward, the self-appointed leader of their class. With sleek hair, perfectly pressed uniform, and eyes that glittered with spite, she turned toward Nalaya with a smile that didn't reach her lips. "Professor," she said sweetly, "since no one dares approach him, perhaps Brooks should try? After all, she has the best grades. Surely she can prove her brilliance." A ripple of laughter moved through the group. Nalaya's stomach dropped. She recognized the trap instantly. If she refused, Sarika would paint her as a coward. If she agreed, she risked her safety. Dr. Kai hesitated. "That is not." But Sarika's voice cut through, sharper this time. "Unless, she's not as capable as her scores suggest." The silence that followed was unbearable. Nalaya felt her throat tighten, heat prickling the back of her neck. She could see the expectation in their eyes, waiting for her to fail. Her voice, when it came, was low but steady. "I'll do it." Gasps followed, then a tense hush as the nurse unlocked the heavy door. The others stepped back, craning to see what would happen. Nalaya's hand trembled slightly on the doorknob, but she swallowed her fear and pushed it open. The room inside was dimly lit, curtains drawn tight against the storm outside. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something darker, old wounds, broken pride. He sat by the window, back straight despite the disarray of his clothes. Even in silence, he radiated presence. His dark hair fell into his face, his jaw still sharp, his posture regal in a way that no illness could erase. This was no ordinary patient. This was a man carved from power itself. For a moment, he didn't move. Nalaya's heart pounded as she set the tray on the table, fresh bandages, a cup of food, medication. She braced herself for violence, for the madness they had warned her about. But when she stepped closer, his eyes lifted to hers. They were deep, unclouded, startling in their clarity. She reached for his arm, hands steady now as she unwrapped the old bandage and replaced it with new. Not a word. Not a strike. He simply watched her, gaze intent, almost reverent. She fed him slowly, one spoon at a time. He accepted, quiet as a child. The silence pressed in from the hallway. They were waiting for her screams. Nalaya turned, ready to leave, when his hand shot out, strong and sure, closing around her wrist. Her breath caught. "Wife," he whispered, his voice hoarse but certain. "Don't leave me." The world outside seemed to vanish. His fingers clung to her like a lifeline, his eyes blazing with something no madness could disguise. And Nalaya, frozen in the doorway, realized the whispers had only told half the story. This man was not broken. He was waiting. And, somehow, he had been waiting for her. The silence on the other side of the door didn't last long. At first there were muffled gasps, then the scrape of shoes shifting nervously in the corridor. By the time Nalaya tried to loosen Kaelith Ruan's grip on her wrist, she heard the hurried clatter of keys, the lock turning. "Nalaya!" Dr. Kai's voice was urgent as the door swung open. The med students spilled in behind him, their faces twisted with a mix of horror and anticipation. They expected blood. They expected her screams. But what they saw was Kaelith Ruan sitting upright in his chair, his fingers wrapped tightly around Nalaya's wrist, his head tilted against her shoulder as if he were resting. "Impossible," one of the nurses whispered. Sarika Han's painted lips parted in disbelief. She had been waiting for the moment Nalaya cried out, for the humiliation that would finally cut her rival down to size. Instead, she found herself staring at the most dangerous patient in the ward, quiet, almost tender, his breathing steady as though he had found peace. Dr. Kai took a cautious step forward. "Mr. Ruan, we're only here to ensure the student's safety." It was as if his words flipped a switch. Caleth's head snapped up, and the air in the room changed instantly. His eyes, moments ago calm and lucid, hardened into something feral, sharp as glass. "Back," he growled, his voice low and lethal. One of the interns flinched. Another stumbled back toward the wall. When a nurse moved forward with a syringe in hand, Caleth's grip tightened around Nalaya's wrist, pulling her closer until she was half-seated on the arm of his chair. His other hand shot out, sending the tray clattering to the floor with a crash. "I said back." His voice thundered this time, filled with the raw authority of a man who was once obeyed without question. The room froze. No one dared to move. The syringe shook in the nurse's trembling hand. Nalaya's heart slammed against her ribs. She could feel the strength in his hold, the storm simmering beneath his skin. For one terrifying second, she wondered if the rumors were true. If he really had lost himself, if she was just another fragile piece about to be crushed. But then she caught his gaze again. Beneath the fury, beneath the madness everyone else saw, there was something else, something that pulled at her with a force she couldn't explain. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her free hand over his. "It's all right, Caleth," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "No one is here to hurt you. Look at me." His breathing hitched. For a moment, the tension coiled tighter, his muscles rigid beneath her touch. Then, like a rope cut loose, the fury slipped from his face. His shoulders sagged. His grip loosened, enough for Nalaya to shift until his head rested against her lap. A collective gasp echoed through the room. He closed his eyes, his breaths evening out as though she alone had tethered him to calm. Dr. Kai's brows knit together, his voice barely a whisper. This doesn't make sense." But sense or not, it was undeniable. The patient who had torn through orderlies, broken bones, and defied every treatment lay in peace only with her. Sarika's nails dug into her palm as she glared at Nalaya, jealousy curdling into something darker. When one of the interns moved again, Caleth stirred, his eyes flickering open. The deadly gleam returned, sharp as a blade. Nalaya instinctively pressed a hand to his chest. "Stay," she murmured. And he obeyed. The realization struck the room like lightning. He wasn't insane, not entirely. He was tethered to her in a way no one could explain. Caleth's lips curved faintly as his gaze found her again. "My wife," he whispered, almost dreamlike, before sleep claimed him once more. The students shifted uneasily, whispers hissing like sparks. Dr. Kai's expression was unreadable, a storm of calculation and disbelief. But Nalaya sat frozen, Caleth's head heavy in her lap, her own heart betraying her with its frantic rhythm. She hadn't expected to survive this test. She hadn't expected him to look at her with eyes that seemed to pierce through every wall she had built. And she certainly hadn't expected this, to become the one person the infamous Kaelith Ruan refused to let go. The commotion that followed spread like wildfire through the ward. By the time Dr. Kai signaled for the students to leave, nurses were already whispering down the halls, their voices hushed but urgent. It wasn't long before the heavy click of expensive shoes echoed on the tiled floor. Nalaya's heart clenched as the door opened again, this time not with timid students but with power itself. A tall man in a sleek suit stepped inside first, Kaelith Ruan's longtime assistant, Shen Luo. His eyes swept the room with the efficiency of a soldier, landing on the sight of his employer, sprawled in the lap of a young woman in a medical coat. Behind him, a woman gasped. Her gown was a cascade of silver silk, her posture regal despite the tremor in her hands. This was Lady Ruan, Kaelith's mother, whose name alone carried weight in every political circle. Caleth, her voice cracked as she hurried to his side. But when she reached for him, his body jerked awake. The transformation was instant. His eyes blazed, his teeth clenched, every muscle tensing with lethal intent. He pushed himself up, shielding Nalaya behind him as though she were the one who needed protection. "Don't touch me," he growled. The temperature in the room seemed to drop at his words. Lady Wan froze mid-step, her hand trembling in the air. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Mr. Wan," Shenluo interjected carefully, his tone practiced, measured. "You're safe. These are your people. You know me. It's Shen." But Kaelith's gaze was locked only on Nalaya, the fury softening the longer his eyes lingered. He turned back slightly, his body blocking hers, his voice low but fierce. "They can't take you away." Nalaya's breath caught. She hadn't realized she was holding his hand until she felt his knuckles brush against her palm, clinging as though she were the last anchor in his unraveling world. The doctors stepped in now, crowding near the doorway, their murmurs filling the silence. One finally spoke aloud. "This confirms it. His test results showed no permanent damage. His episodes must be psychological. And tied to her." "All of you, out," Lady Wan commanded, her tone regaining its steel. She turned her gaze on Nalaya then, sharp and assessing. "Stay." Nalaya's stomach dropped. "Madam, I'm just a student. I shouldn't." "You will," Lady Wan cut in. "You're the only one he responds to. Do you want to watch him waste away again?" Dr. Kai cleared his throat, stepping in to buffer. "Miss Brooks, think of this as an opportunity. A study unlike any other. A thesis subject that could define your career." His eyes were cautious, but there was a strange spark there, too, as if he was half in awe of the impossible connection unfolding before them. Shenluo bent slightly at her level, his voice quieter, urgent. "Name your price. A place to live, money, protection. Whatever you want. Just don't leave him." Caleth tugged her hand suddenly, forcing her to sit beside him again. His head pressed against her shoulder, his breath steadying as though the storm had passed the moment she returned to his side. His lips curved faintly. "My wife stays." The room fell silent. The billionaire's words hung in the air, thick with implications no one dared voice. Nalaya's chest tightened, fear and something sharper warring inside her. She hadn't come here to be anyone's lifeline. She came here to learn, to build a career that had cost her everything to pursue. And yet, with Caleth's warmth pressed against her side, his eyes closing in fragile peace only she could grant, Nalaya knew this was no longer just another rotation. It was the beginning of something she couldn't walk away from. The drive back to Caleth's house was quiet, yet the silence felt loud, oppressive, and binding. Nalaya sat beside him in the sleek car, the lights of the city flickering against the glass as though mocking her with reminders of a world that seemed farther and farther away. When they reached his estate, the gates swung open with mechanical precision, and she felt herself swallowed into his domain. The marble floors gleamed beneath the soft lighting, and the vast halls stretched endlessly, their beauty laced with menace. She wasn't a guest anymore, she was part of his possession, and though Caleth never said it outright, she felt it in every glance, every touch, every silence. Yet he never let her feel unsafe. His presence was like iron forged into armor, his watchfulness constant, his protectiveness unshakable. The strange paradox of him, her captor and her shield, unraveled her. By the next morning, Caleth stirred, his strength slowly returning. His arm tightened around her, drawing her closer into his chest. His voice, still hoarse, rumbled against her ear. He hadn't let her go back to her room last night, insisting she stay by his side. "You're mine, wife. I'll protect you until the world burns." Her heart thundered. She had come searching for freedom. Yet as she lay tangled in his arms, she knew the truth. Freedom might never compare to the dangerous, consuming fire of Caleth. Nalaya slipped out of bed quietly, her gown from the night rumpled from his touch, Caleth still asleep in the tangled sheets. As she reached for her shoes, his deep voice stopped her. "Where are you going, wife?" The word rolled out like silk and steel. She turned. Caleth was awake now, propped against the headboard, his bare chest lit by soft morning light. He looked healthier already, though his eyes still carried the sharpness of a predator who never truly rests. "I was just going to get you some water," Nalaya lied, voice uneven. Caleth smirked faintly, though his gaze pinned her.
Good.
Then bring it here. But don't think of leaving me.
It wasn't a request.
It was a decree. From that day, Nalaya's life shifted. She resumed her medical studies by day, but every evening she returned to his house. Caleth's insistence grew, protective to the point of suffocation. He demanded she personally administer his medication, though the doctors declared him stable. He refused to eat unless she brought him food. And when nightmares clawed at his sleep, only her touch could soothe him. The staff whispered now, their awe turning into reverence. The young mistress, they called her behind her back, certain she had bewitched him. But Nalaya knew the truth. It wasn't her magic, it was his madness that tethered them. One evening, as she sat beside him, carefully changing the bandages on his arm, his eyes never left her. The silence between them was thick until he finally said, "They think I'm broken. But with you here, I feel whole." Her hands stilled, heart clenching. "Caleth, you don't need me to be whole. You're healing." His fingers shot out, wrapping around her wrist, firm but not cruel.
"No. Don't say that. I need you, Nalaya.
You are my wife, whether you accept it or not."
Her pulse raced.
She should have denied it, corrected him, reminded him this was temporary. But the way he said it, with such raw certainty, left her silent. The days blurred into weeks. Nalaya found herself waking in his bed more often than in her own. His protectiveness only deepened. When she tried to take the bus to school, his driver intercepted her with a simple message, "Mr. Caleth says it isn't safe." When a male professor praised her work, Caleth's glare alone was enough to silence him mid-sentence. Yet beneath the suffocation, there was tenderness. He laughed only with her. He ate only when she fed him. He slept peacefully only when she was near. He kissed her hands with a reverence that made her ache, even as he held her captive in invisible chains. One night, as rain lashed against the windows, Nalaya found herself curled against him, her head on his chest as his steady heartbeat lulled her. "Wife," he murmured, half asleep, his fingers threading through her hair. "Don't ever leave me. Without you, the darkness comes back." Her throat tightened. She had come to China for medicine, for her future. But somewhere along the line, her life had intertwined with his broken soul, and she didn't know if she could pull away anymore. And though she told herself she felt trapped, part of her no longer wanted freedom. Not from him. Not from Caleth. The night of the gala was a storm dressed in silk and diamonds. Crystal chandeliers blazed above the ballroom, casting shards of gold across the sea of gowns and tuxedos. Nalaya stood at Caleth's side, her dark skin glowing beneath the light, her posture composed though her heart raced. He hadn't let her out of his sight all week. His hand rested at the small of her back now, firm, protective, possessive. Guests whispered as they passed, "The fallen tycoon has returned. Who is the woman? Is that the reason he's recovered?" Caleth ignored them all, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, every face. He carried himself with the authority of a man resurrected, but Nalaya felt the tension beneath his calm.
He was wary.
And though she didn't want to admit it, so was she. Halfway through the evening, Caleth leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "Stay here. I need to take a call." Before she could protest, he disappeared into the labyrinth of corridors leading away from the ballroom. Nalaya tried to remain still, sipping her wine, but an unease twisted in her gut. Minutes passed.
Too many minutes.
The knot in her chest tightened until she couldn't ignore it anymore. Leaving her glass half full, she followed the faint trail of voices until the glitter of the ballroom faded, replaced by shadowed hallways. "Caleth," she whispered. No answer. Then she found him. Slumped against the wall of a deserted suite, his breathing ragged, his pupils blown wide. A glass shattered at his feet. "Caleth." She rushed forward, dropping to her knees. His skin burned under her palms, his veins thrumming with unnatural heat. The sharp tang of incense hung heavy in the air, and beneath it, something sweeter, cloying. Nalaya's heart lurched. An aphrodisiac. He grasped her wrist suddenly, his grip desperate. "Nalaya, wife." His voice was hoarse, strained. "They drugged me." Her training told her to keep calm, but her body trembled as she dragged him into the suite, locking the door behind them. She tried to steady him, wetting a cloth, murmuring comfort, but every touch only seemed to inflame him further. "Leave," he ground out, pressing his forehead against hers. Before it takes me over." "I'm not leaving you like this," she whispered fiercely. His eyes met hers then, wild, glazed, burning with a hunger that stripped her of every defense. The cloth slipped from her hands. His mouth found hers in a desperate kiss, and suddenly she was drowning in fire. The incense thickened, their breaths tangled. She tried to tell herself it was the drug, not him, not her. But the way he held her, reverent, frantic, as though she were the only thing anchoring him, broke through every barrier. Clothes fell away. Morning came with a cruel clarity. Nalaya sat at the edge of the suite's bed, her fingers twisting in the sheets, while Caleth stood before the mirror, fastening his cufflinks with the precision of a man who had returned to himself. He looked composed, powerful, every inch the ruthless tycoon the city once bowed to. But when his gaze caught hers in the reflection, his jaw clenched, something raw flickering in his eyes. "You should get dressed," he said evenly. "I'll have my driver take you home." The detachment in his tone cut deeper than any intimacy the night before. Nalaya rose slowly, clutching the blanket around her, her voice trembling. "So that's it? After everything, you just dismiss me?" Caleth turned sharply, his eyes burning. For a moment, he looked as though he would shatter. Instead, he crossed the space between them, cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted his words. "You don't understand. The people after me, after us, they will use you to destroy me. I had no right to touch you last night, and I will not chain you to my darkness." His voice broke on the last word. But Nalaya could feel it in the way his thumb lingered against her cheek, the way his body leaned toward hers despite his restraint. His heart was at war with his mind. Days passed, and life tried to resume its rhythm. Nalaya went to her classes, attended her rotations, pretending nothing had changed. But everything had. The feel of his lips haunted her, the sound of his voice calling her wife echoed in her chest. And Caleth, though he no longer summoned her in public, shadowed her every step. His men escorted her discreetly. His car always seemed to appear when she left the hospital late. She once caught him in the crowd at the marketplace, disguised, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. One night, unable to bear the distance anymore, Nalaya stormed into his mansion. "Why are you doing this?
You keep me close, but you push me away."
"You're suffocating me." Caleth was waiting for her, his expression unreadable. In 2 strides, he closed the space, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Because I cannot lose you," he growled. "The moment you walked into my madness, you became my salvation. Do you understand? Without you, I am nothing." Her breath hitched, her protest dying on her lips. His forehead pressed to hers, his voice low, desperate. "I told myself I would release you. But every night without you, the darkness claws back in. You belong to me, Nalaya, and whether you accept it or not, I belong to you." Her resolve wavered, her body trembling under the weight of his confession. She knew she should resist, should remind herself of why she had come here, of her own dreams and freedom. But as Caleth's lips claimed hers again, she realized the truth that terrified her most. She didn't want to escape him anymore. Because somewhere between his madness and her mercy, she had fallen too. The storm broke only days after Nalaya had confessed, at least to herself, that she no longer wanted to escape Caleth. It was late evening when the attack came. The mansion was unusually quiet, Caleth reviewing documents in his study while Nalaya prepared tea in the kitchen. She had just lifted the tray when the sound of shattering glass split the silence. A shout echoed, followed by the thunder of boots. Nalaya froze. Then Caleth's voice, sharp, commanding, cut through the chaos. "Stay where you are, Nalaya." But she didn't listen. She dropped the tray and ran. Armed men in black had breached the estate, shadows spilling through the grand hall. Caleth fought like a man possessed, his fists and fury striking with precision despite being outnumbered. Still, the danger was overwhelming. One man raised a weapon, and Nalaya's scream ripped through the air, before she realized she had thrown herself between Caleth and the blade. The attacker faltered, startled. In that instant, Caleth struck with deadly force, disarming him and sending him crashing to the marble floor. "Nalaya!" Caleth's hands gripped her shoulders, his face ashen. "Are you hurt?" "No," she whispered, though her heart threatened to burst.
"But you could have been."
Rage and relief warred in his gaze as he pulled her against him. "This is what I feared. My enemies will not stop. They will use you until I have nothing left." And yet, his voice cracked as his forehead pressed to hers. "I cannot let you go. Even if it destroys us both." That night, After the intruders were subdued and the police took over, Nalaya sat with Caleth in the shattered remnants of the study. He wouldn't release her hand. His knuckles were bruised, his shirt torn, but his eyes burned only for her. "You have a choice now, Nalaya," he said quietly, almost broken. "Go back to your career. Return to your life. Walk away before my shadows consume you." She stared at him, trembling. A dozen faces flashed in her mind. Her professors, her classmates, her family waiting across oceans. Her dream of becoming a doctor, of healing minds, had brought her here. And yet, sitting before Caleth, she realized she had already healed someone. She squeezed his hand, her voice steady despite the tears rising in her throat. "I didn't come this far to run. If you are destroyed, then I will burn with you. But I won't leave you, Caleth. Not now, not ever." For a moment, silence. Then Caleth pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. His body shook, not with fear, but with the force of emotion he could no longer contain. "You've bound yourself to me," he whispered fiercely. "And I swear, by every breath I have left, I'll protect you. You are my wife, Nalaya, not just in madness, but in truth." The words sealed something irrevocable between them. Chains, yes, but chains forged of choice, not force. Later that night, as she lay in his arms amidst the wreckage of the world that wanted him broken, Nalaya understood the truth. She hadn't just chosen him. She had chosen them. And there was no power on earth, no enemy, no shadow, that could unbind what had been sealed in blood and oaths. The sun broke over the horizon in hues of gold and rose, its light spilling across Caleth's estate like a benediction. For the first time in months, there was no shadow lurking at the edges, no whisper of danger behind closed doors. The war was over. His enemies, those who had tried to poison him, to ruin him, to strip him of his throne, were gone, scattered like ash before the wind. Caleth stood at the balcony, his broad frame bathed in dawn. A thin scar traced his jaw, the last remnant of the war, but it no longer made him look wounded. It crowned him. Behind him, Nalaya stirred beneath silken sheets, blinking awake to find him already watching the sunrise. His gaze softened when it turned to her. "My wife," he murmured. The word carried the weight of all the battles they had survived, and the promise of all the tomorrows yet to come. Nalaya rose and slipped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his back. "You're up early. Again." "I was afraid it was all a dream," he confessed quietly. "That if I closed my eyes too long, I'd wake to find you gone." She tightened her hold. "You'll never lose me, Caleth. Not to your enemies, not to my career, not to anything. We've fought too hard for this." Her career, once threatened by scandal, betrayal, and her own heart's conflict, now shone brighter than ever. No longer just the foreign doctor, she became the name on everyone's lips, the psychiatrist who dared to care for the most dangerous man in the city, and lived. Reporters wanted interviews, hospitals sought her, colleagues marveled at her courage. Her career didn't just survive, it blossomed. Patients reached out, drawn to the woman who had looked into the abyss and chosen to stay. Caleth watched it unfold with a quiet pride that surprised even him. When the wedding day came, it was not a spectacle of power, though the halls were filled with dignitaries, nobles, and allies. It was a vow renewed before all who had doubted them. Nalaya walked the aisle in a gown that shimmered like captured moonlight, her steps steady, her heart full. Caleth stood waiting, his eyes never leaving hers. As she reached him, he took her hand, kissed her knuckles, and whispered for her alone, "You are my victory, Nalaya." The vows were exchanged, and when the final words bound them, the hall erupted in celebration. Music, laughter, the clinking of goblets. Yet for Caleth and Nalaya, the world narrowed to the warmth of each other's embrace. Their kiss was not just passion, it was triumph. Time moved forward. Their home filled with life, children's laughter echoing through the halls, tiny hands tugging at Caleth's cloak, curious eyes watching Nalaya paint. She often sketched them, immortalizing each fleeting moment in strokes of color and light. Caleth, once the warrior with only steel to his name, became the father who carried sleepy little ones on his shoulders, the man who could finally rest without fear. One evening, years later, as the sun set behind their home and the gardens bloomed in wild color, Caleth watched Nalaya cradle their youngest, her hair catching the last rays of light. He thought of the nights he nearly lost her, of the poisons and blades and choices that might have broken them. But none had. I was born for battle, he said softly, kneeling beside her.
But you taught me what it means to live. To love.
Nalaya leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyes glistening with quiet joy. And we will keep living, Caleth. Together. Always. Above them, the stars shimmered, eternal witnesses to their bond, crowned not by power, nor fear, nor even victory, but by love. A love that had faced fire, shadow, and betrayal, and emerged stronger than any enemy could ever hope to break. It was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of forever,